For almost a decade, I've been on the road as a long-haul truck driver. You get used to the solitude, the long hours, and the isolation that comes with it. I've driven through all kinds of weather, on roads that seem to stretch on forever, and into towns so remote they're barely on the map. But in all those years, there's one particular night that continues to haunt my nights. I was 32 years old and on a cross-country trip from New York to Florida. It was late October 2019, and I had just crossed the state border when I realized I needed to pull over for the night. I had been on the road for almost 11 hours nonstop, and my eyelids were starting to feel heavy. You know the feeling. Your brain starts to slow down, and before you know it, you're asleep at the wheel. It's not safe. I wasn't near a major truck stop, just a long, empty stretch of highway with nothing on it. I figured I'd find the next rest stop and pull over there for a few hours of sleep. It wasn't ideal, but I had done it plenty of times before. That's when I saw the sign, rest stop 2 miles. Perfect timing. I slowed down as I approached the exit and turned off the highway. As I pulled into the rest stop, I could already feel something was off. The place was almost deserted. There were only 2 other trucks in the parking lot, both parked at the far end, their cabs dark, no signs of life inside. The rest stop itself wasn't much to look at, just a few parking spots, some picnic tables, and a rundown old restroom building. There were no lights except for a single flickering streetlight near the entrance, casting eerie shadows across the cracked pavement. I parked my truck in the middle of the lot, not too close to the other trucks, but not too far away either. Something about the isolation felt wrong, but I figured I was just being paranoid. I turned off the engine and sat there for a moment, letting the desert silence sink in. It was a disturbing kind of silence. No wind, no crickets, no distant hum of traffic, just a suffocating, dead quiet. I grabbed my thermos and took a long swig of coffee, hoping it would shake the uneasy feeling that was creeping up my spine, but it didn't. After a few minutes, I decided to stretch my legs and use the restroom before bed. I grabbed my flashlight from the glove compartment and got out of the cab. The night air was cool, and the gravel crunched under my boots as I walked towards the restroom building. The restroom was in worse shape than I expected. The door was hanging slightly off its hinges, and the walls were covered in graffiti. I pushed the door open and went inside. The smell hit me first, musty, damp, as if the place hadn't been cleaned in centuries. I flicked the light switch, but nothing happened. I aimed my flashlight at the cracked tiles and peeling paint. While I was using the restroom, I heard it, the sound of footsteps. Slow at first, then getting louder, like someone was walking slowly around the building, circling it. I froze. The rest stop was deserted when I pulled in. No other cars had come, so who was walking around out there? I quickly finished up and got out of the stall. I listened intently, straining to hear, but the footsteps had stopped. I pushed the door open, shining my flashlight around the parking lot. Nothing. Just the same eerie silence and the dim glow of the flickering streetlight in the distance. I headed back to my truck. I was halfway back to my truck when I saw him. A man standing near one of the picnic tables. I could barely make him out in the dark. He was standing there, his hands shoved into the pockets of a thick jacket, his face hidden by a hood pulled low over his head. I stopped in my tracks, my heart pounding. He wasn't there when I got out of the truck. I was sure of it. Where did he come from? I kept my flashlight aimed at him, but he didn't move. He just stood there, perfectly still. I couldn't make out his face, but something about his posture, the way he just stood there as if he was waiting for something, sent a chill down my spine. I forced myself to keep walking. As I got closer to my truck, I glanced back. The man hadn't moved. He was still standing there watching me. I got into the cab, locked the door behind me, and sat there for a moment. I reassured myself that it was nothing. But why didn't I see him arrive? And why was he just standing there? I peered out the window, but the man was gone. I lay down on the bed in the back of the cab, thinking I would try to sleep, but the unease I had felt only grew worse. I couldn't stop thinking about the man by the picnic table, the way he just stood there watching me in the shadows. I don't know how long I lay there, but it must have been close to an hour. I was just starting to doze off when I heard it again. Footsteps. This time, right outside my truck. I sat bolt upright. I grabbed my flashlight and shined it through the window, but there was no one there. The footsteps continued, now circling the truck, slow and deliberate. My stomach lurched with fear. This wasn't my imagination. Someone, or something, was out there. I listened as the footsteps stopped right outside my door. I held my breath, waiting for something to happen. But the next sound I heard wasn't footsteps. It was a knock. Soft at first, almost polite, like someone was gently rapping on the door. I didn't move. I couldn't. Then the knock came again, this time harder, more insistent. I leaned forward, trying to peek through the window without making it obvious, but I couldn't see anyone, just the edge of the truck bathed in the dim light of the streetlight. Then from the other side of the cab, I heard it again, another knock. It was like someone, or more than one person, was knocking on both sides of the truck simultaneously. I grabbed my phone, my hands shaking as I dialed 911, but there was no signal. I cursed under my breath, knowing how remote the area was. Of course, there was no service here. The knocking continued, more aggressive. Whoever was out there wasn't just messing with me. They wanted in. I reached out and slammed my fist on the horn. The blaring sound echoed throughout the empty rest stop. For a moment, the knocking stopped. I waited, my breath caught in my throat, listening for any sign of movement. Then I heard it. A car engine. Headlights illuminated the darkness as another vehicle pulled into the parking lot, its bright beam sweeping across the pavement and lighting up the shadows that were lurking outside my truck. 3 figures were standing there, spread out around my truck. They were all wearing dark clothes, their faces obscured by hoods. When the car's lights shined on them, they froze, then quickly dispersed, disappearing into the desert darkness. I didn't waste any time. I turned the key, started the engine, and drove out of that rest stop as fast as I could. My heart was pounding, my hands shaking as I gripped the wheel. I didn't look back. I didn't want to. I drove straight through the night, not stopping until I reached a well-lit truck stop a few hours later. Even then, I didn't feel safe. I couldn't stop thinking about the figures who'd been knocking on my doors. I told a few other truck drivers what had happened, and one of them told me he had heard rumors about that rest stop. Apparently, it wasn't the first time something like that had happened there. People had gone missing, trucks found abandoned, but there was never any proof, just stories. I never stopped at a remote rest stop again. You never know who or what might be waiting for you in the dark. I've been a truck driver for over 20 years, and let me tell you, I've seen some strange things on the road. The long stretches of highway at night can play tricks on your mind. Sometimes you see shadows that aren't really there, or your tired eyes start to blur reality. You get used to the solitude, the endless miles, but there's one night, one stretch of road that I'll never forget. It was a late November night, and I was hauling a load through the Pan American Highway, Chile, on a desolate stretch of road that cuts through miles of empty desert. The road was straight as an arrow, with no towns for miles, no gas stations, no rest stops, just pitch black darkness on either side of me. I usually don't mind the solitude, but that night, something felt off. The air was heavy, a kind of weight that pressed down on your chest and made it hard to breathe. I looked at the clock on the dashboard. Midnight. I still had a few hours to go before I planned to pull over, but I wasn't feeling tired. There was a restless energy in the air that was keeping me alert. About an hour into my drive, I saw the car. At first, it was just a pair of headlights in my rearview mirror far off in the distance. I didn't think much of it, but the car didn't seem to be catching up to me. It stayed behind, maintaining the same distance. After about 20 minutes, I started to get a little suspicious. I had been driving at a steady speed and the car behind me should have caught up by now, but this one stayed put. Another 30 minutes went by and the car hadn't moved. My palms started to sweat and my heart started to beat faster. I tried to calm myself down, reassuring myself that it was just my imagination. I turned off the radio, which was only emitting static, and tried to focus on the road, but the damn car was still in my rearview mirror. I decided to slow down and let the car pass me. I eased off the gas, dropping to 50 kilometers per hour, then 40, then 30. The car stayed put. It didn't get any closer, didn't fall back. My heart was racing now. I slammed on the brakes, bringing my truck to a complete stop in the middle of the road. I sat there staring into my rearview mirror, waiting for the car to catch up. But when I looked again, it was gone. The road behind me was empty. No headlights, no car. I put the truck in gear and started moving again. I had been driving for about 15 minutes when the headlights reappeared in my rearview mirror. My stomach dropped. The car was back. The same distance, the exact same spot in my rearview mirror. It was as if nothing had happened, as if it had never disappeared at all. I tried to remain calm, but every few seconds, my eyes glanced back at the rearview mirror. I thought about pulling over at the next gas station, but there wasn't one for another 40 miles. That's when the car started to move. It was getting closer now, slowly at first, but then picking up speed. My heart was pounding in my chest as I watched it approach. I stepped on the gas, speeding down the highway at 70, 80 kilometers per hour. But no matter how fast I went, the car kept up with me. It was like something out of a nightmare. The headlights filled my rearview mirror, so bright that I had to squint to see the road ahead. Then the car was right on top of me, so close that I could almost make out its shape. But as quickly as it had appeared, the car veered off into the darkness, vanishing from my rearview mirror. I didn't stop until I reached the next gas station, a small, decaying place. The attendant looked at me like I was crazy. After I told him what had happened, he gave me a knowing look. "You're not the first trucker to see something strange on that road," he said. "Some people say there's a phantom car that follows drivers out there, but it never actually does anything. Just scares the hell out of you." I never took that route again. I avoid it like the plague, because no matter how hard I try to convince myself that it was just my imagination, there's a part of me that knows that whatever was out there that night, it wasn't normal. As a 35-year-old truck driver, I've always loved the solitude of the job. It's calming. There's just me, my rig, and the road. I don't have to deal with anyone, and I can get lost in my own thoughts. I was driving somewhere in the middle of the Australian outback on a lonely highway. It's one of those stretches of road where you can drive for hours without seeing another vehicle. It was almost 10 p.m. when I started to realize something was wrong with my truck. The engine made a faint sputtering sound, barely audible at first. I glanced at the dashboard. Nothing was wrong. But the sound persisted, a regular little cough from the engine. I still had 2 hours to go before reaching the next truck stop, but about 20 minutes later, the sputtering turned into a full-on stutter, and the engine just died. The truck slowly coasted to a stop on the side of the road, leaving me in the eerie silence of the night. I turned the key, but the engine wouldn't start. I turned on the emergency lights and got out of the cab. I opened the hood and grabbed a flashlight, shining it all over the engine. Everything looked fine. No obvious leaks, no signs of damage. But something was wrong. I tried to contact anyone on the CB radio, but there was only static. My phone had no signal. I was stranded in the middle of nowhere. Just as I felt a strange sensation creep up my neck, I saw a pair of headlights in the distance. Relief washed over me. As the vehicle got closer, I could see it was an old pickup truck. It stopped, and a tall, thin man got out. His clothes were worn and dusty. There was something about him that immediately made me uneasy. "You need some help?" he asked, his voice hoarse and low. I hesitated, but what choice did I have? "Yeah, my truck broke down," I said. The man nodded. "Mind if I take a look?" I let him. He walked to my truck, moving with a strange, deliberate slowness. He didn't seem too interested in the engine, just stood there, peering under the hood. The hairs on my arm stood up, and I took a step back. The man stayed under the hood longer than he should have, his head tilted slightly as if he was listening to something. When he finally turned to face me, "Looks like you're in a bit of trouble," he said, his voice low. "But I can help. There's a place not far from here, just off the highway." My gut screamed at me to refuse. There was something in his voice that felt wrong. "I appreciate the offer, but I think I'll just wait for a tow," I said. The man stared at me for a long time, his eyes cold and calculating. Then, without a word, he turned and walked back to his truck. But the way he did it, slow and deliberate, made it clear that this wasn't over. I watched the man get into his truck, but he didn't leave. He just sat there, his engine running, waiting. I got in and locked my truck door. Minutes passed, then an hour. His truck still hadn't moved. Suddenly, his truck lurched forward, pulling up next to mine. He rolled down his window. "You sure you don't want that help, buddy?" I didn't answer. He got out of his truck and started walking towards my door. As he got closer, panic surged within me. I grabbed the tire iron from under the seat, clutching it tightly in my trembling hands. He reached the door and knocked loudly. "Open up," he said, his voice low and threatening. Just as he reached for the door handle, I heard the sound of another engine in the distance. Headlights appeared in my rearview mirror. The man froze, his hand still on the door handle. He looked back at the approaching vehicle, then turned and walked back to his truck without a word. He sped off, disappearing into the night. Another truck driver pulled up behind me and stayed with me until a tow truck arrived. I've been driving for years, but that night was the closest I've ever come to real danger. The man on the highway may have seemed like he was offering help, but I know now that his intentions were anything but good. To this day, whenever I drive on a lonely stretch of road, I always keep an eye on the road and never, ever stop for a stranger. I've been a truck driver for over 20 years, and let me tell you, I've seen some strange things on the road. The long stretches of highway at night can play tricks on your mind. Sometimes you see shadows that aren't really there, or your tired eyes start to blur reality. You get used to the solitude, the endless miles, but there's one night, one stretch of road that I'll never forget. It was a late November night, and I was hauling a load through the Appalachian Mountains in Virginia, USA, on a desolate stretch of road that cuts through miles of empty desert. The road was straight as an arrow, with no towns for miles, no gas stations, no rest stops, just pitch black darkness on either side of me. I usually don't mind the solitude, but that night, something felt off. The air was heavy, a kind of weight that pressed down on your chest and made it hard to breathe. It must have been around 2 a.m. when I first heard it. A whisper. It was so soft it almost blended in with the sound of my truck's engine. At first, I thought it was just my mind playing tricks on me, but the whisper didn't go away. I turned my head slightly, listening, trying to make out the sound. It was low, like someone was murmuring right behind me. I looked in the back of the cab, but of course there was no one. I reassured myself that I was just tired, but deep down, I knew it wasn't true. The whisper grew louder, more insistent. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone. It was cold, almost angry. A shiver of unease ran down my spine. I tried to focus on the road, to push the sound out of my mind, but it was like trying to ignore a persistent itch. It was there, nagging at the back of my brain, making it impossible to think of anything else. About an hour later, things started to get worse. I was coming around a sharp curve when I saw movement in my rearview mirror. Just a flicker of something, a shadow that disappeared into the fog behind me. I nearly slammed on the brakes, my heart leaping into my throat. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my nerves. "You're seeing things," I told myself. "You're tired, and the fog is playing tricks on your eyes." But the shadow was too clear, too human. By the time it was 4 a.m., I was a nervous wreck. The whispers hadn't stopped, and the shadows in my rearview mirror were becoming more frequent. Every time I looked back, I saw something, just for a split second. A figure standing in the fog watching me, but when I blinked, it was gone. I was starting to think I was going crazy. I was driving on a long, straight road. The fog was so thick I could barely see past the hood of my truck. The whisper became louder, almost frantic, but I still couldn't make out the words. I kept glancing at my rearview mirror, half expecting to see another shadow when I saw it. A face. I slammed on the brakes, my truck screeching to a halt in the middle of the road. My chest tightened, my heart pounding as I stared into the rearview mirror, struggling to catch my breath. There, in the back seat of my cab, was a face. Pale, expressionless, and cold. It stared at me through the reflection, its eyes dark and hollow. Terror gripped me, freezing me in place. I turned around hoping, no, dreading, to see someone sitting behind me, but the back seat was empty. I forced myself to breathe, my hands shaking as I gripped the wheel. I didn't want to look at the rearview mirror again. I didn't want to see that face, but I had to know. Slowly, I looked up at the rearview mirror. Nothing, just the back seat, empty as it should have been. But that didn't make me feel any better. I could still feel it, whatever it was, lingering in the cab with me, watching, waiting. Then the radio crackled to life. At first, I thought it was just static, but as I listened closer, I realized it wasn't. There was a voice in the static, distorted and faint, like someone was trying to talk to me from miles away, and it was calling my name. Marie. I froze. The voice was low, raspy, as if it was coming from deep within the earth. Marie, don't look back. I pulled my hand away from the dial. I felt like I was going to throw up. The voice was still there, repeating the same phrase over and over, each time getting louder, more desperate. My hands shook as I reached for it, my fingers touching the edge of the mirror. I had to know. I had to see. Slowly, I adjusted the mirror, just enough to catch a glimpse of the back seat, and there it was again, that face just staring at me. I slammed the mirror back into place and stomped on the gas pedal, speeding down the fog-shrouded road at a dangerous speed, but I didn't care. I just had to get away. The voice on the radio was a crescendo now, a chaotic mess of distorted sound, all yelling the same thing. Don't look back. I didn't dare. I kept my eyes on the road ahead, even as I felt the cold presence in the cab grow stronger, as if the face was moving closer, creeping towards me. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely keep control of the wheel. I didn't know where I was, didn't know if I was even on the right road anymore. All I could see was fog and darkness, the world outside my truck dissolving into a haze. The radio crackled, sputtered, then went silent. For a moment, there was nothing but the sound of my engine and my own ragged breathing, and then, as quickly as it had begun, the fog lifted. I kept driving for hours until I reached the next town. I pulled into a diner parking lot, my hands still shaking as I turned off the engine. I sat there for a long time, trying to steady my breathing, trying to convince myself that what had just happened wasn't real, but no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the feeling that it had been. I haven't told anyone what happened. Who would believe me? A phantom face in my rearview mirror, a voice on the radio warning me not to look back. It sounds insane, even to me, but I know what I saw, I know what I heard, and to this day, I have never driven through those mountains again.